You barely visit anymore. Marriage should be your priority, not this silly career, Lydia snapped, her cold eyes boring into me. Milo shifted uncomfortably beside me, on the floral-patterned couch. Mom, Elise works hard. You don't have to be so hard on her. Lydia waved her hand dismissively. She needs to focus on her duties as a wife. When are you two going to start a family? I clenched my jaw, fighting the anger bubbling inside me. This wasn't the first time Lydia had made digs about my job and criticized me as Milo's wife. But today, on our rare joint day off, it stung more than usual. My career is important to me, I said evenly, proud of myself for not raising my voice. And we've discussed children. We'll have them when the time is right for us. Lydia's eyes narrowed. For you, you mean? For your convenience and schedule, typical modern woman always putting selfish desires first. That was it. We should get going, I said flatly, standing up. Milo opened his mouth, then closed it again, standing as well. Yes, run off. Par for the course these days, Lydia called after us. The drive back to our condo was silent. Milo kept glancing over at me, lips pursed, but I stared straight ahead, too angry to speak. How could he let his mother talk to me like that? When we got home, I went straight to the bedroom to be alone. A few minutes later, Milo poked his head in. Else, are you okay? I whirled around, my fury unleashed. No, I'm not okay. Your mother constantly belittles me and my career, and you just sit there and take it. Do you agree with her outdated, misogynistic views? He recoiled. What? No, of course not. She just has a certain way of speaking. She doesn't mean anything by it. I stared at him in disbelief. Doesn't mean anything by it? You can't be serious. She clearly thinks my job makes me a bad wife and that having a career means I'm selfish. She's just old-fashioned, Else. You know how she can be. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders. Don't let it bother you so much. I jerked away, unable to believe his nonchalance. My career was a huge part of who I was. How could he downplay his mother's words so easily? This has been building for years, I said, voice shaking slightly. She repeatedly criticizes and demeans me. I feel disrespected in my own marriage by my own husband. Milo's face fell. Els, I'm sorry. I never meant to make you feel that way. But it was too late for apologies. His flippant response to his mother's toxic behavior spoke volumes. I suddenly felt overwhelmingly alone. I can't keep living like this, I said quietly. We need to get counseling to work through these issues. If we can't get on the same page, I don't know if our marriage can survive. Milo paled, but I stood firm, my mind already spinning ahead to the next chapter of my life. The next morning, I was sifting through the mail when a letter from our bank caught my eye. Frowning, I opened it and froze. Our checking account was nearly empty. Milo, I called out, panic rising in my chest. Come here. He shuffled into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. What's up? Look at this, I said tersely, thrusting the bank statement at him. Our account is almost drained. What did you do? He scanned it and cringed. Ah, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Meaning to talk to me? We're supposed to be partners, Milo. How could you fritter away our savings without consulting me? I didn't fritter them away, he protested. I had some unexpected expenses come up. Like what? You better start explaining yourself right now. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, you know my parents haven't been in the best health lately. They needed some help with medical bills. They needed help? So instead of having an adult conversation with me, you just took money? It was an emergency. I couldn't let them get behind or wreck their credit rating. That's not an excuse, I said through gritted teeth. You went behind my back and used our marital assets. That's financial betrayal. I was going to tell you, Milo said, raising his hands. I just wanted to handle it first. That's no justification. You're a liar, Milo. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. His eyes widened. Else, come on, you're overreacting. It's not that big a deal. I stared at him incredulously. Not a big deal? He was more worried about his own guilty conscience than my feelings. We're supposed to be partners, I said, voice breaking. But you're disrespecting me and undermining our marriage with this garbage. I'm your wife, not your doormat. Milo rolled his eyes. There you go again, being overdramatic and emotional. It's not as serious as you're making it. That was it. I'd had enough of his dismissive, condescending attitude. I balled my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. You clearly don't value me, our marriage, or our finances, I spat. If you can't be an equal partner and show me basic respect, then I don't know what we're even doing here. Something flickered in Milo's eyes then. Was it shame? Hurt? I found I didn't care anymore. This callous financial betrayal was just one more blow after his mother's hurtful words. I was done being mistreated. I'm going to stay with Angela for a few days, I said, voice icy calm. Maybe some time apart will give you perspective. I stormed past him, grabbing my purse and keys. At the door, I turned back. I gave you my ultimatum yesterday. Get your act together, Milo. Seek counseling or be prepared to lose me. This behavior ends now. The door slammed behind me with a note of finality. As I drove away, tears blurring my vision, part of me already knew his answer. When I returned home from Angela's a few days later, Milo was waiting for me in the living room. He leapt up from the couch when I walked in. Els, thank God you're back. I've been so worried. He moved to hug me, but I stepped back, arms folded across my chest. I needed some space to think, I said flatly. Milo's face fell. I get it. I really screwed up with the money stuff. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't good enough this time, Milo. Your actions have consequences. You're right, he said, nodding vigorously. I know I disrespected you, our marriage, everything. It won't happen again, I swear. That remains to be seen, I replied, unmoved. I've lost faith in a lot of your promises. Milo looked stricken. Els, please, tell me what I can do to fix this. I'll do anything. I took a deep breath. I want us to go to marriage counseling. Immediately, he paled. Counseling? Isn't that a bit extreme? No, it's not extreme, I exploded. We're at a breaking point here, Milo. I've put up with a lot. Your mother's constant belittling, your betrayal of my trust regarding our finances. If you want to save our marriage, we need professional help to work through these issues. Milo gaped at me. Els, come on. Do we really need to drag some stranger into our business? I stared at him, dumbfounded by his resistance. Didn't he understand how serious this was? Yes, we really do need counseling, I said in a measured tone. It's that or risk losing me for good. I'm deadly serious about this. The hurt flashed across his face again. You're talking about divorce? I'm saying our marriage is on the line here. We've tried the easy way, the disrespect, the loss of trust. None of that has gotten through to you. So yes, if counseling doesn't work, then we may be headed towards divorce. That's just the cold, hard truth. Milo looked completely poleaxed. In that moment, I realized just how checked out he'd become, how little he valued or prioritized me in our relationship. The fact that divorce was shocking to him spoke volumes. I love you, Els, he said, voice catching. I don't want to lose you. For the first time in a long while, I saw sincerity in his eyes, but underneath was an undercurrent of fear. Fear of change, of sacrifice, of loss. Not love. Then we go to counseling. Period, I replied. Take it or leave it. I held his gaze, not backing down an inch. He finally nodded slowly. Okay, anything you want, I'll do it. But doubt swirled in my mind as I watched him turn away, head in his hands. His actions and choices going forward would determine everything. Meanwhile, part of me had already come to terms with where this might lead. A few weeks later, Milo and I were having breakfast when the doorbell rang. I frowned and went to answer it. On the doorstep stood Lydia and George, Milo's parents, suitcases in hand. Oh good, you're home, Lydia said, brushing past me into the condo. We're moving in for a while. I stood there, dumbfounded. Excuse me, moving in? George shuffled by as well, grunting a brief hello. Milo appeared behind me. Mom? Dad? What's going on here? We've had some health issues come up, Lydia explained, already unpacking her things. We can't stay in our place for the time being. For how long? And why didn't you give us any notice? This isn't okay, I said, trying to stay calm. Lydia barely glanced at me. Don't be so dramatic, Elise. It's only temporary, while we get our affairs in order. Right, Milo? She turned her cold gaze to her son. Milo looked cornered. Well, I knew they needed help, but I didn't know the full extent until this morning. You knew? I interrupted. And you didn't think to discuss this with me first? Milo held up his hands. I was going to bring it up. Mom just sprung it on me, too. Like hell you were, Lydia snapped. Stop lying to appease your wife. You knew we couldn't stay on our own. Thank goodness you married a woman with such a spacious home and income to support us. The way she said support us made my skin crawl. I turned to Milo, furious. Is this true? Were you planning this without consulting me? To my horror, he wouldn't meet my eyes. The realization washed over me. He and his mother had once again gone behind my back. "You know we've been having health problems," George piped up gruffly from the hallway. "Don't be so selfish and inflexible." "Selfish?" I exploded. "Bringing house guests into our home without notice or consent is the height of disrespect. This is a boundary violation," Lydia tutted. "Don't be so overdramatic, Elise. We're family." "That's exactly the problem," I shot back. "You don't treat me like family. You undermine and insult me constantly, and Milo just enables it." Milo still wouldn't look at me. He was paralyzed, torn between his wife and his toxic parents. "Well, if this living situation is such a hardship for you, you know where the door is," Lydia said, words dripping with venom. "Milo can make the decision that puts his family first." In that moment, I saw the truth with terrible clarity. Milo's ultimate loyalties still lay with his parents, no matter their behavior. My wishes, my boundaries meant nothing to them. Tears stung my eyes as I stared at my husband's cowardly, downcast face. It was over. I was done being disrespected and trampled on. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, letting it slam behind me. I made it to my car before the sobs overcame me. Through the blur of tears, I knew I had been a fool. Milo's controlling mother had won. I had no choice left. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed the number for a divorce lawyer. Over the next couple of weeks, I moved out of the condo and into a studio apartment, attempting to rebuild my shattered life. I went through the motions at work and tried to block out the pain and anger. My mind kept returning to Milo moving his parents in without my consent. It was a profound breach of trust, and there had to be more to it. He couldn't be that oblivious and controlled by his mother, could he? One night, I was going through some old files and came across our joint banking statements from the past year. Frowning, I pulled out a pen and paper and started tallying up some numbers. 2 hours later, I slumped back in my chair, staring at the totals in horror. It all made sense now. Milo had been funneling money from our accounts to his parents in secret for months. Thousands upon thousands of dollars frittered away under the guise of medical emergencies and essential expenses. I felt sick to my stomach. Not only had Milo violated my trust by moving his parents in, he had been systemically draining our finances to support them behind my back. It was a level of deception I couldn't have imagined. The next morning, I stormed up to Milo's office at the school, heart pounding. His face fell when he saw me. "Else, what's going on?" "This," I spat, shoving the accounting notes at him. "This is what's going on." Milo scanned the papers and visibly paled. "Oh, God! Oh, God is right," I exploded. "How could you do this, secretly siphoning our money for over a year? Do you have any idea the level of betrayal here?" "Else, I was going to tell you. I swear, I just hated disappointing you." "This is so far beyond disappointment." I was shaking with rage. "You've been lying to me for months, using joint marital assets to fund your parents' lives. It's financial infidelity." Milo hung his head. "I know. It spiraled out of control before I could fix it." "Spiraled?" I laughed bitterly. "You made the choice to deceive me repeatedly. I just can't believe you'd stoop this low." "Please. You have to understand. They really did have emergencies and nowhere else to turn." "Don't give me that." I cut him off. "This is about your inability to set boundaries with your toxic, manipulative mother. Always has been." Milo looked up, shame and hurt warring on his face. I almost felt bad for a moment until I remembered he had brought this upon himself. "I can't be with someone who repeatedly violates my trust and boundaries," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone who values his parents' whims above his own wife's needs and well-being. It's over, Milo." The words hung in the air. Deep down, part of me realized I'd already made my choice. "Else, no, please." Milo reached for me, but I jerked away. "It's done," I said flatly. "I'll have my lawyer begin divorce proceedings." Milo let out a soft sob, but I refused to give in to sentiment. He had made his choices, and there were consequences. I turned and walked out, holding my head high. There was no more energy left for me to waste on him and his poisonous family. From here on out, I needed to focus on myself. As I got in my car, I took a deep, shuddering breath. A strange sense of calm came over me. I was free. A few weeks after I told Milo I was divorcing him, I received a frantic call from Angela. "Elise, you have to get over here right now. It's an emergency." My heart leapt into my throat. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Just come quick. It's about Milo and his family. I'll explain when you arrive. I raced over to Angela's, cursing traffic the whole way. When I burst through her door, she was pacing anxiously. Thank God you're here. Lydia and George showed up with all their crap, demanding to stay with me. What? I stared at her, aghast. Why on earth would they come to you? They got kicked out of your place. Milo said he can't afford to keep supporting them anymore after the divorce expenses. I seethed, furious that Milo and his parents still felt entitled to bleed me dry. Of course they want to mooch off someone else. Typical. I turned them away, obviously, Angela went on. But Lydia started screaming and yelling, making all these wild accusations. She claimed you pushed Milo into divorce so you could take all his money and cut them off completely. My jaw dropped. That's insane. She's delusional. I'm divorcing Milo because of his lies and disrespect, not money. I know, Angela soothed, but she's spiraling, and I was worried she'd do something rash. So I told them to come here to hash it out with you directly. Just then, the doorbell rang. Angela gave me an apologetic look as Lydia's shrill voice came through the door. Open up! We know the deceiver is here! I steeled myself and went to the door, Angela behind me. Flinging it open, I came face to face with Milo, Lydia, and George. Lydia's face was twisted in rage. You wretched woman, she spat. What have you done to my son? Mom, please, Milo hissed. But she brushed him off. You've poisoned his mind and destroyed his life, you gold-digging witch. Now you're using divorce to steal from us. I recoiled at her vitriol, but forced myself to stand firm. That is categorically false. Your son was the one repeatedly lying and stealing from our marital assets to fund your lifestyle. I had no choice but to protect myself. Lies, she screamed. You manipulated and trapped him. He's penniless because of you. He's penniless because he drained our finances to give you money behind my back for over a year. I shot back. Your toxic control forced him to violate my boundaries repeatedly. Lydia laughed, a grating cackle. So you admit he valued us over you? As he should. You're nothing but a selfish harpy. That was it. I'd had enough of her venom. If what you say is true, if Milo truly valued you over me as his wife, then how pathetic is that? My words hung in the air. Milo looked stricken but stayed silent, cowed. George just grunted, arms folded. You're a cancer, Lydia, I went on, voice shaking with fury. And Milo let you infest and destroy our marriage so he could keep appeasing you. It's sick. I stared at my soon-to-be ex-husband, filled with a maelstrom of emotions. But underneath it all was pity. I'm divorcing a mama's boy too weak to stand up for himself or his wife, I said quietly. How sad for you both. Lydia's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I had deflated her bluster. Now get out, Angela interjected firmly. You're not welcome here. She closed the door in their stunned faces. I sank down onto a chair, emotionally drained. As the shouts started up outside, I realized I was finally, truly free. The toxic grip had been severed. It was time to reclaim my life. As I sat with Angela that day, watching Lydia and Milo through the window as they cursed and ranted, something shifted inside me. Their vitriol no longer had the same sting. I felt numb, detached. After they finally stormed off, Angela turned to me with a worried look. Are you okay? I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I took a deep breath and slowly let it out. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Angela searched my face, confused. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done letting them have power over me. That chapter of my life is closed. I thought for a moment. In fact, I'm not going to just passively end things with Milo. I'm taking control. Angela sat back, surprised. Taking control how? By getting justice. I stood up and began pacing, energy coursing through me. Milo systematically depleted our marital assets for over a year, giving that money to his vile parents behind my back. It was illegal and unethical on multiple levels. Angela nodded slowly, catching my meaning. So you're going to go after them, legally and financially? Absolutely. I'm consulting lawyers immediately to explore all my options. I have the evidence of his fraud and deception. He and his parents are going to face consequences. A grim smile crossed my face as a plan began to form. In fact, I may handle things a bit more creatively than just the legal angle. What are you thinking? Angela asked warily. Milo and Lydia have always dismissed me as some inconvenient, emotional modern woman who didn't know her proper submissive place, I explained. They underestimated me. I paused, picturing both their smug, sneering faces. I'm going to make them realize the full extent of exactly what kind of strong, capable woman I am. I'm going to utterly dismantle their world and status, just as they tried to do to me. Angela's eyebrows shot up. Damn, girl, you sound like a woman on a warpath. Damn right, I replied, eyes flashing. They messed with the wrong modern woman. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in research and planning. I met with a lawyer well-versed in financial crimes and divorce, laying out the full scope of Milo's betrayal with documentation. We began gathering additional evidence of the money trail, tracing the funds he had diverted to his parents over the past year. The lawyer assured me we had enough for criminal and civil charges of fraud, misappropriation of marital assets, and more. But I didn't stop there. I consulted a private investigator to dig deeper into Milo and Lydia's backgrounds and activities. I wanted to expose every shady financial dealing, every personal and reputational skeleton they tried so hard to hide. The investigator turned up a host of illicit activities from Lydia's past: tax evasion, unpaid debts galore, even a messy sex scandal that had been neatly swept under the rug. It confirmed my instinct that her holier-than-thou facade hid monstrous hypocrisy and moral failings. As the puzzle pieces came together, I began to set my plan in motion. There would be 3 stages. First, I would go scorched earth legally and financially, draining Milo and his parents of every last ill-gotten resource. Second, I would systematically expose and publicize Lydia's sordid history and criminal activities, completely dismantling her pedestal in the community. Finally, I would make an example of Milo to ensure full accountability. With each step planned out, I felt a sense of strength and purpose I hadn't experienced since my life with Milo unraveled. I was in control now. And as for sentiment, there was none left. It was time to repay them with the same ruthless selfishness they had shown me. Only then would justice be served. About 6 months after my fateful confrontation with Lydia and Milo, I was putting the final touches on my plan. It was time to strike. I sent out formal invitations to Milo, Lydia, George, and a handful of their closest friends and relatives, requesting their presence for a family gathering at my place. They would be expecting some sort of attempt at reconciliation. Little did they know. The appointed evening arrived, and my guests began filtering in, looking confused and annoyed. Lydia swept in last, chin high, glaring around imperiously. "Well, what is the meaning of this charade?" she demanded when she spotted me. I smiled thinly. "Please, everyone take a seat. I have an announcement to make." Mutterings filled the room as they grudgingly sat. Milo kept shooting me panicked looks, terrified of a scene, no doubt. Once they settled, I began to speak. "Friends, family, I've gathered you all here today to share some important news and set the record straight on a few matters." I paused, taking in their wary faces. Lydia was scowling. "Many of you know that my marriage has dissolved over the past year. What you may not realize is the scale and severity of the betrayal and damage done." I looked directly at Milo, who shrank under my gaze. "My husband systematically depleted our joint marital assets and finances over many months, funneling thousands upon thousands to support his parents' lifestyle and expenses without my knowledge or consent." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Lydia shot Milo a venomous look. "It was discovered," I went on, "that he fraudulently misused our funds out of an unwillingness to cut off his parents' constant demands for financial support. The extent of the deception is staggering." I shook my head slowly. The trust, respect, and sanctity of marriage was completely violated, and so decisive action had to be taken. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a manila envelope. "As of today, I have officially filed both criminal fraud charges and a civil lawsuit against my former husband, Milo. A portion of all future earnings and assets will be garnished to compensate for the damages." Milo's head snapped up, eyes wild. "You can't be serious!" But I pressed on. "Additionally, I have filed civil liability claims against both Lydia and George for their role in encouraging and facilitating this misconduct." My voice strengthened. The bright lights of legal and financial ruin will now be shone in their faces. No stone will be left unturned. All misdeeds and shady dealings will be completely exposed. Lydia finally found her voice. "You lying snake! You can't do this. I won't allow it." I laughed coldly. "You have no power here anymore, Lydia. Your reign of abuse and manipulation is over." Reaching into my bag again, I pulled out a sheaf of documents. In fact, let's go ahead and begin the exposure right now, shall we? I started detailing Lydia's long history of criminal transgressions, tax evasion, insurance fraud, illegal offshore accounts, shady business dealings, even her little sex scandal that she thought stayed buried. Her face ashen, Lydia gaped at me as I mercilessly laid out the bitter, ugly truth. Around the room, shock and revulsion rippled through the guests, utterly dismantling the vain, holier-than-thou facade she had carefully constructed over the years, showing the world the real Lydia, a grasping, immoral hypocrite. She had no one to blame but herself. I finally fell silent. Lydia could only whimper denials through trembling lips. Looking around the room, I saw the dawning horror and disgust on every face, even Milo's. Her house of lies and illusions was crumbling. This was my revenge, my justice. They had underestimated me at every turn, and now the tables were turned. You brought this upon yourselves, I said quietly. You chose to make me your enemy, and you have no one to blame but yourselves. You think you can just waltz back into our lives with empty promises and a guilty conscience? The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice laced with years of pent-up resentment. I watched as my husband Declan flinched at my accusation, his carefully crafted facade cracking ever so slightly. For a moment, the man I'd once loved stood before me, exposed and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the charming, successful marketing executive he portrayed to the world. "Thea, please, let me explain," he pleaded, his eyes darting around our modest suburban home, as if searching for an escape. I crossed my arms, steeling myself against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Explain what, Declan? That you've been lying to me all this time? That you've been leading a double life?" The words hung in the air, the weight of their truth bearing down on us both. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on, how many times Declan had betrayed my trust. My gaze drifted to our son Finn, who stood silently by my side, his hazel eyes narrowed with a wisdom and maturity far beyond his 15 years. The pain and confusion etched on his face made my heart clench. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, our little family, torn apart by Declan's selfish actions. "Mom, what's going on?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden my son with the ugliness of his father's transgressions. But Finn deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Your father has been—" I paused, struggling to find the right words. "He's been keeping secrets from us, Finn, secrets that are going to change our lives, whether we're ready or not." Declan took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Thea, please, let's not involve Finn in this. This is between you and me." I let out a humorless laugh. "Between you and me? Don't you think Finn has a right to know what kind of man you really are?" I turned to my son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Finn, your father has been having an affair. He's been living a double life, betraying our family." Finn's eyes widened, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. "An affair? But how could you, Dad?" He shook his head, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do this to us?" Declan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, the silver-tongued charmer was at a loss for words. I took a step closer to Finn, wrapping my arm around him protectively. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Finn, but I promise you we're going to get through this, together." Finn nodded, his jaw set with a determination that belied his age. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering as I stared down my husband. "We're going to fight. Declan's betrayal isn't just about me. It's about our family, our future, and I won't let him destroy everything we've built without a fight." Declan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "Save it, Declan. The time for excuses and empty promises is over. Now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." The air was thick with tension as we stood there, 3 lives irrevocably changed by the unraveling of Declan's web of lies. But in that moment, I knew that Finn and I would emerge stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of adversity. This was our fight, and we were ready to win. The next few days were a blur of fury and determination. After Declan's botched attempt to smooth things over, I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. There was only one thing left to do: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. So, with Finn's help, I started digging. We followed Declan's movements, tracking his comings and goings, piecing together the fragments of his double life. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a clue that would change everything. One evening, as Declan was leaving for another late night at the office, Finn and I decided to follow him. We trailed his car through the city streets, our hearts pounding in anticipation and dread. Finally, Declan pulled into an upscale apartment complex, one I didn't recognize. "This is it, Mom," Finn whispered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Let's see what he's hiding." We waited, hidden in the shadows, as Declan let himself into the building. Minutes later, a young woman emerged, her blonde hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the modest suburban housewife I had become. "Who is she?" Finn asked, his voice laced with anger. I shook my head, my own fury building. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." We watched as the woman entered Declan's car, and the two of them drove off together. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Betrayal, rage, and a twinge of heartbreak swirled within me, each emotion fueling my determination to uncover the full extent of Declan's deception. "We need to get inside that apartment," I said, my gaze locked on the building. Finn nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm with you, Mom." We made our way to the apartment, and with a bit of lock-picking skill that Finn had picked up from a friend, we were inside. The place was immaculate, clearly maintained by someone with Declan's refined tastes. But it was the personal touches that made my blood boil. Framed photos of the woman, her belongings scattered throughout the space. "He's been living a double life," I murmured, the reality of the situation sinking in. "All this time, he's been deceiving us, betraying our family." Finn's jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We're going to expose him, Finn. We're going to bring his whole world crashing down around him." "How?" Finn asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I turned to him, a grim determination etched on my face. "We're going to plant the seeds of his downfall. We're going to use his own deceit against him, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Finn nodded, his expression mirroring my own. "I'm with you, Mom, whatever it takes." We left the apartment. The evidence of Declan's infidelity burned into our minds. The drive home was silent, the weight of our newfound knowledge heavy upon our shoulders. But I knew that this was only the beginning. Declan's betrayal would not go unanswered, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned to Finn, my eyes meeting his. "Get ready, Finn. The storm is coming, and we're going to be the ones to weather it." The walls of our home seemed to close in on me as Finn and I returned from our investigation. The reality of Declan's betrayal weighed heavily, a dark cloud that threatened to consume us both. Finn was the first to break the silence. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I could hear the trepidation in his voice, the fear that his family was falling apart. He was just a child, yet he was forced to grapple with the ugly truth of his father's deception. "We're going to fight back," I said, my own voice steady and resolute. "Declan needs to be held accountable for what he's done." Finn's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking within them. "How? What's the plan?" I paused, weighing my words carefully. "We're going to use his own lies against him. We're going to expose his affair and the embezzlement at his company." Finn's brow furrowed. "Embezzlement? You think he's been stealing from his company?" I nodded grimly. "It's the only explanation for the lavish apartment and the way he's been living. Declan's always been good with numbers, and it wouldn't be hard for him to siphon off funds." Finn's expression shifted, the innocence of youth replaced by a steely determination. "Okay, what do we do?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "Finn, this isn't going to be easy. What we're about to do could have serious consequences. Are you sure you're ready for this?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Mom, whatever it takes." I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his unwavering loyalty. Declan had betrayed us, but Finn and I would stand united, no matter the cost. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next few days, Finn and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence against Declan. We scoured his financial records, meticulously documenting the discrepancies and misappropriated funds. Alongside that, we set the stage for exposing his affair, planting breadcrumbs that would lead directly to his mistress. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience and precision. Finn proved to be an invaluable partner, his sharp mind and keen observation skills complementing my own. Together, we wove a web of deceit that would ensnare Declan, leaving him no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. As the final pieces fell into place, Finn and I stood in our living room, surveying the evidence before us. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Finn asked, his eyes reflecting the weight of what we were about to do. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. Declan needs to pay for what he's done. This is the only way to ensure our family's future. Finn took a deep breath and then squared his shoulders. "Okay, let's do this." With a few clicks of the mouse, the incriminating information was sent out into the world. Anonymous tips that would unleash the storm upon Declan's carefully constructed facade. In the quiet that followed, Finn and I stood together, our hands clasped tightly. We had taken the first step, and now the dominoes were set to fall. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a united front, mother and son, determined to reclaim our lives from the ashes of Declan's betrayal. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation, as Finn and I waited for the dominoes to fall. We knew that it was only a matter of time before Declan's world came crashing down around him, and we were both equal parts terrified and resolute. The first signs of the impending chaos came when Declan started acting strangely. He was distracted, his usual charm and confidence replaced by an underlying anxiety. I watched him, feigning ignorance as he made frantic phone calls and retreated to his study for hours on end. "Something's wrong," Finn whispered one evening as we sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. "Do you think he knows?" I placed a comforting hand on his arm. "If he does, he hasn't confronted us yet, but we need to be prepared for when he does." Finn nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What's the next step?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We need to plant the final piece of evidence, something that will irrevocably link Declan to the embezzlement and his affair. Finn's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. "What do you have in mind?" "I've set up a false paper trail," I explained, my voice low and steady. "Documents that will implicate Declan in the embezzlement, with his mistress as the motive." Finn's expression shifted, a glimmer of unease crossing his features. "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, we're essentially framing him." I reached out and squeezed his hand, my gaze unwavering. "I know, Finn, but Declan has left us no choice. He destroyed our family, and now he has to face the consequences." Finn nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Okay, let's do it." Together, we carefully planted the evidence, ensuring that it would be discovered at the most opportune moment. As we finished, a sense of finality settled over us, the weight of our actions palpable. "It's done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "What now?" I pulled him into a tight hug, my own emotions threatening to spill over. "Now we wait, and when the time is right, we'll be there to watch Declan fall." The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Declan's behavior grew more erratic, and I could see the strain taking its toll on him. Finn and I kept our heads down, acting as if nothing was amiss, but the anticipation was palpable. Then, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. Declan burst through the front door, his face contorted with rage and panic. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his eyes wild. I stood my ground, my expression calm and collected. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Declan." "Don't give me that crap, Thea," he spat, his hands trembling. "I know you're behind this. The company is investigating me, and they've found evidence of embezzlement, and—" He trailed off, the color draining from his face as he realized the full extent of his downfall. "And your affair," I finished, my voice laced with a quiet triumph. "Looks like the walls are closing in, Declan." Declan stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a coherent response. In that moment, I saw the man I had once loved for who he truly was, a coward, a liar, and a betrayer. Finn stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Dad. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned and fled, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house, a fitting symphony to the crumbling of his carefully constructed life. As the door slammed shut, Finn and I stood together, our eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The first phase of our plan was complete, and now the final act was about to unfold. The days that followed Declan's confrontation were charged with a tense and uneasy silence. Finn and I knew that the final act was about to unfold, and we steeled ourselves for the inevitable fallout. Declan, for his part, had become a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I had once loved. In his place was a desperate, cowering figure, constantly looking over his shoulder. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. One evening, as Finn and I sat in the living room, the sound of Declan's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I turned to Finn, my gaze unwavering. "It's time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn nodded, his expression resolute. We moved to the front window, watching as Declan hurried up the path, his movements frantic and erratic. The front door burst open, and Declan stumbled inside, his eyes wild and his face twisted with anguish. "Thea! Finn!" he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. "What have you done?" I stepped forward, my arms crossed over my chest. "What are you talking about, Declan?" "Don't play dumb with me," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "The company knows about the embezzlement. They know about Elise." Finn tensed beside me, his jaw clenched tight. "So your little affair has finally caught up with you, huh, Dad?" Declan's gaze snapped to our son, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "You two? You did this, didn't you? How could you?" I held up a hand, silencing him. "We did what we had to do, Declan. You brought this on yourself." "But I'm your husband," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. "How could you do this to me?" "You lost the right to be our husband and father the moment you betrayed us," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You destroyed our family, Declan. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his head cradled in his hands. "Please, Thea, Finn, you have to help me. I can't lose everything." Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "You should have thought about that before you started lying and cheating. Now it's too late." Declan looked up at us, his eyes pleading. "I'll do anything. Please, just help me." I shook my head, my heart hardening against the man I once loved. "It's too late for that, Declan. The die has been cast." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Declan's face paled, and he scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate search for an escape. "That's her," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Elise." I watched as the front door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Declan, what's going on?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her. Declan moved towards her, his hands outstretched. "Elise, you have to help me. Thea and Finn, they've—" But before he could finish, a barrage of text messages and emails began to flood Elise's phone. She looked down, her eyes widening as she read the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. "Declan, what is this?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "Embezzlement? Affair?" Declan's face crumpled, and he reached for her, but Elise recoiled, slapping him across the face. "You lied to me," she spat, her eyes brimming with tears. "All this time you were using me." Declan cowered, his once proud demeanor shattered. "Elise, please, I can explain." But Elise was already turning towards the door, her steps quickening with each passing moment. "It's over, Declan," she called out, her voice thick with disgust. "I want nothing to do with you." And with that, she was gone, leaving Declan alone, his world collapsing around him. Finn and I watched, our expressions stoic, as the final dominoes fell, and Declan's reckoning had arrived. The fallout from Declan's downfall was swift and unforgiving. In the days following the confrontation at our home, the evidence we had so meticulously planted began to surface, sending shockwaves through his company and personal life. Finn and I watched with a mixture of triumph and unease as the revelations unfolded. Declan's embezzlement scheme had been uncovered, with a paper trail leading directly back to him. His affair with the younger colleague Elise had also been exposed, her angry tirades and accusations splashed across social media for all to see. The company's executives were swift to act, convening an emergency board meeting to discuss the shocking allegations against their star marketing executive. Finn and I positioned ourselves strategically, ensuring we would have a front-row seat to Declan's downfall. As the meeting commenced, the tension in the room was palpable. Declan, once the picture of confidence and control, sat hunched in his chair, his eyes darting around the room in a futile search for a way out. "Mr. Langston," the CEO began, his voice grave, "we've received some disturbing information regarding your conduct at the company. Allegations of embezzlement and an inappropriate relationship with a colleague. Do you have any explanation for these serious charges?" Declan's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. The CEO's expression hardened. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the substantial transfers of company funds into a personal account, or the considerable sums spent on lavish gifts and trips for this colleague of yours." Declan swallowed hard, his face pale and drawn. I can explain. It's not what it seems. I was just trying to." "Save it, Declan," the CEO interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. You've betrayed the trust of this company and your family. As of this moment, you are terminated from your position, and we will be pursuing legal action against you." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, executives shouting and demanding answers, the sound of Declan's world crashing down around him. Finn gripped my hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and vindication. "It's happening, Mom. He's getting what he deserves." I squeezed his hand, my own expression grim. "Yes, Finn, but this is only the beginning." As the meeting descended into chaos, I scanned the room, searching for any sign of Elise. It wasn't long before I spotted her, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. Declan caught sight of her, his eyes widening in panic. Elise, please, you have to help me. You know I love you. We can—" But Elise cut him off, slapping him hard across the face. "How dare you, Declan? You used me, lied to me, and now you expect me to help you. You're pathetic." Declan recoiled, his hand clutching his reddened cheek. "Elise, please. I can make this right. We can—" "There is no we, Declan," Elise spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're done. I want nothing more to do with you or your twisted little family." With that, Elise turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Declan to face the consequences of his actions alone. As the executives continued to berate and interrogate Declan, Finn and I watched in silence, our plan unfolding flawlessly. The dominoes were falling one by one, and Declan's world was crumbling around him. In that moment, I knew that our long-awaited revenge was at hand. Declan had betrayed us, and now he would pay the price. The echoes of his betrayal would reverberate through his life, a haunting reminder of the consequences of his actions. The days that followed Declan's public downfall were a whirlwind of chaos and upheaval. As the investigation into his embezzlement and affair deepened, the once respected marketing executive found himself stripped of his job, his reputation, and the life he had so carefully crafted. Finn and I watched from the sidelines, our expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and a hint of unease. We had engineered Declan's downfall, but the weight of our actions still lingered, a constant reminder of the difficult choices we had been forced to make. The news of Declan's transgressions spread like wildfire, splashed across headlines and social media. His colleagues, once admirers of his success, now turned on him with a vengeance, their disgust and outrage palpable. The company he had worked for unceremoniously severed all ties, leaving him to face the legal consequences of his actions alone. One afternoon, as Finn and I sat in our living room, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a distraught Elise, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Thea, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Elise, what are you doing here?" She pushed past me, her gaze wild and erratic. "I can't believe this is happening. Declan, he's ruined everything." Finn appeared at my side, his expression wary. "What do you want, Elise?" Elise whirled around, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I want to know why you did this. Why did you destroy Declan's life?" I held up a hand, my voice calm and measured. "Elise, Declan brought this upon himself. He betrayed our family, and we had to take action." "But I loved him," Elise cried, her hands clenching into fists. "I thought we had something real. How could he do this to me?" Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Declan was using you, Elise. He's been lying and cheating his whole life. You were just one of his victims." Elise shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I can't believe it. All this time I thought he was the one. And now? She trailed off, a sob escaping her lips. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm. I'm sorry, Elise. I know this is difficult, but Declan's actions have consequences. You deserve better than him. Elise looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know what to do. My life is in shambles because of him. Finn stepped forward, his voice soft but resolute. You have to move on, Elise. Declan is going to face the full weight of the law for what he's done. You don't have to be a part of that. Elise nodded, her jaw clenching with determination. You're right. I can't let him drag me down, too. She turned to the door, pausing for a moment. Thank you, Thea. Finn, I hope you both can find a way to move on from this, too. With that, she was gone, leaving Finn and I alone once more. We stood in silence, the weight of our actions heavy on our shoulders. Do you think she'll be okay, Mom? Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, pulling him into a tight hug. I hope so, Finn, but right now we need to focus on rebuilding our own lives. Finn nodded, his arms tightening around me. What about Dad? What's going to happen to him? I felt a twinge of regret, but it was quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve. Declan will have to face the consequences of his actions, Finn. The authorities are already closing in on him. It's time for him to pay for what he's done. Finn's grip on me tightened, and I knew that, despite the difficulty of our situation, we would emerge stronger. Declan's betrayal had shattered our family, but Finn and I would rebuild, stronger and more resilient than ever before. In the aftermath of Declan's downfall, Finn and I found ourselves grappling with a range of emotions, relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. The dust had settled, and while the scars of his betrayal remained, we were determined to move forward and reclaim our lives. As the legal proceedings against Declan unfolded, the full extent of his misdeeds became public knowledge. The embezzlement charges were staggering, and his affair with Elise only added to the tarnish on his reputation. Declan, once a respected and influential figure, now found himself shunned by his former colleagues and facing the very real possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. Despite the gravity of the situation, Finn and I took solace in the knowledge that justice was being served. Declan would have to answer for his crimes, and we could finally begin to heal and rebuild our lives without the burden of his lies and deceit. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and colleagues, my dedication to my nursing career becoming a source of pride and purpose. The promotion I had been working towards for years finally materialized, and I reveled in the validation of my hard work and resilience. Finn, too, blossomed in the absence of Declan's toxic influence. He threw himself into his studies, his grades soaring as he set his sights on prestigious colleges and universities. The light in his eyes had returned, and I could see the weight of the world slowly lifting from his shoulders. One evening, as Finn and I sat in our living room enjoying a rare moment of peace, the doorbell rang. I tensed, half expecting to see Declan on the other side pleading for our forgiveness. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by an unfamiliar face, a stern-looking police officer. "Mrs. Langston?" the officer asked, his voice neutral. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you, officer?" "I'm afraid I have some news regarding your husband, Declan," he said, his expression unreadable. Finn appeared at my side, his eyes filled with trepidation. "What happened?" The officer cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between us. "Mr. Langston has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his crimes. The embezzlement and affair charges were substantial, and the judge deemed him a flight risk." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a twinge of sadness. Declan had brought this upon himself, but the finality of his punishment was still a difficult reality to accept. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for informing us, officer." The officer nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "If you have any questions or need assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us." With that, he turned and left, and Finn and I were left alone once more. I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Finn," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Declan's finally going to pay for what he's done." Finn nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad, Mom. I'm glad we fought back. I'm glad we didn't let him get away with it." I pulled him into a tight hug, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Me too, Finn. Me too. In the days and weeks that followed, Finn and I continued to rebuild our lives, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. I secured the promotion I had worked so hard for, and Finn excelled in his studies, his sights set on the future. As we sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace and resilience that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Declan's betrayal had shaken us, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between Finn and me. We had weathered the storm, and now we were stronger for it. "You know, Finn," I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon, "I'm proud of you. Proud of us. We've come a long way, haven't we?" Finn reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with understanding. "Yeah, Mom, we have, and I'm glad we did it together." In that moment, I knew that our future was bright and that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, Finn and I would face them side by side, our bond stronger than ever before.